Most cameras score this as risky driving. Driver Eye understands the context and reinforces great driving like this. Improve safety and reduce driver turnover. Welcome to the Green Zone.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. You know, Drilling Deep is the place in the FreightCast family of podcasts where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you need to drill for the first to get the second. So that's why we call the show Drilling Deep. We also have a guest every week, and today's guest is very special. It's somebody from our sponsor, Netradyne. We're going to have Adam Khan, the Chief Business Development Officer at Netradyne, here to talk about the latest developments on in-camera technology, in-cab technology, and how a company like his uses those capabilities. But first, we're going to talk about oil, and we're going to talk about diesel, and it's about something we really haven't had to say for quite some time. As I write this, or as I record this, the price of ultra-low sulfur diesel on the CME commodity exchange has risen about 53 cents from where it settled on the first day of July. That number is based on the settlement from the day earlier when I'm recording this. As I'm recording this, it's up about another 5 cents. Here's the good news, bad news for consumers of diesel. The good news is you haven't seen that much of an increase at the pump. The bad news is that ultimately is going to change. The weekly Department of Energy Information Administration retail price that is used as the basis for most fuel surcharges was up 9.9 cents per gallon last Monday. Within the craziness of the market that started about the time Russia invaded Ukraine, that big of a one-week increase was no big deal. There have been several bigger changes than that since February 2022. But to give you a sense of how abnormal a 9.9 cent one-week increase is, in the 10 years prior to that, a change that big would have been one of the biggest increases for a single week. So yeah, it's a big deal. The size of the increases in the oil market have been pretty eye-opening. Brent crude, the international benchmark, is up about $8 a barrel since the start of July. West Texas Intermediate, the U.S. benchmark, is up about $9 per barrel. And gasoline, which trades on the CME as an unfinished product called RBOB, has been right there with diesel. As I'm recording this, it's also up about 54 cents per gallon in July. And here's the thing. There's no obvious reason for this. There's been no sudden disruption in supply anywhere in the world, certainly nothing that's new. Russian oil is now getting priced near or higher than the cap that was supposed to limit how much money they could get for their oil, and it doesn't look like that's having much of an impact on their shipments. Weekly U.S. production figures for crude do show it backing off slightly, so that is something to watch as well. Natural gas is going nowhere despite the hot weather, so that isn't dragging oil along with it. A weakening dollar has been a factor, but in the last few days, the dollar strengthened and oil just went on rise. Remember that oil and the dollar have an inverse relationship. There has been a narrative for several months now that market bulls have stuck to. They look at the forecast for global oil demand by the end of the year. They look at production given reductions put in place by the nations of the OPEC Plus group. Then they look at reductions in output implemented on top of that by Saudi Arabia. And they see a market squeeze. I won't call it a squeeze. We'll say market tightness by the fourth quarter. The fact is that in June, OPEC Plus output was down about 650,000 barrels per day, actually about 660,000 barrels per day from April compared to April. Actually, that was the May figure was down around 660,000 barrels a day. And then it flatlined in June, no change. The July numbers are going to be very interesting to see just what it is that the Saudi cuts have done to overall production. The point here is that this has not been a news-driven market. It looks like a fundamentals-driven market, or at least a perception of the fundamentals. Now, the other side of the argument would be that the Chinese economic recovery coming out of the COVID zero policy remains sluggish. Europe is in or is near a recession. and the tighter supply is going to go into a market with a sluggish demand profile, balancing out the two declines. Here's another piece of discouraging news for diesel consumers, and I mentioned it before. Here at FreightWaves, we measure the spread between retail and wholesale diesel prices in Sonar. That spread recently got down to levels it hasn't seen in many, many months. It's a sign that retail is not keeping up with changes in wholesale prices, and the wholesale prices in turn are rising on the back of increasing futures prices. And that is a signal that retail has a ways to go to catch up to what's happened in the wholesale market. And that is another point, that we've kept these prices in check in part because retail just is not reacting to wholesale. Remember that the DOE number dropped for 20 out of 23 weeks? Remember that? It wasn't all that long ago. That was good time for diesel consumers. You can assume that that run is over. We want to thank our sponsor this month, Netradyne. Ready to step up your fleet safety? Titan Freight reduced distracted driving by 96% while losing 0 drivers after implementing Netradyne Driver Eye, the leading AI fleet camera system. Go to Netradyne.com to learn more about how Driver Eye can revolutionize your fleet safety too. Time to move on now on Drilling Deep. We've talked here in the past about trucks and cameras. It seems like such a simple thing, and yet it raises so many issues. What is the relationship between the camera and the driver? How much intrusion is too much? And where is the balance between that and the safety considerations that cameras undoubtedly bring? And what's the next set of features in camera systems in an AI-driven world? Here to talk about it today is Adam Khan of Netradyne. Netradyne, by the way, is our sponsor here on Drilling Deep for the month. Greatly appreciate that. Adam is the Chief Business Development Officer at Netradyne. He's based in San Diego. And this basic technology is not sitting still. He's here to talk about that today. So, Adam, welcome. And again, thank you for your sponsorship.
Hey, John, thanks so much for having me on the podcast here. I do appreciate the time, and I hope everyone gets a couple tidbits of information from us and enjoys the conversation.
Nobody has yet to walk away from a Drilling Deep episode with at least a few tidbits. So I'm sure this will continue. So first of all, why don't you talk about Netradyne? How long has it been around?
Yeah, so Netradyne is about a 7-year-old company. I joined the company in the infancy stage. I think I'm a single-digit employee. And a lot of what our team really tried to do was start from scratch and not carry a lot of the legacy design of safety technology. As an example, one of the things we made as a guiding principle is that we were going to advocate for the driver than trying to find what's wrong with the driver. And that's really carried our internal mantra about, how we develop products, how we talk about products. It's always looking for the positive element of that technology versus trying to pick out, the negative, which has been around for a long time.
Right. I mean, the negative would be the idea that cameras are there as kind of and this is why it can cause some tension with the drivers, is sort of I hate to say spy, but looking to be a little more punitive than positive.
Right. Yeah, and cameras have been kind of a necessary technology inclusion into the cabs, and there's a huge benefit proposition around coaching drivers and making people aware of how they're driving, and everyone strives to improve. And if you can coach a driver where they miss that one accident or they do that one maneuver that creates them safe and gets home at night, that's a win for the industry. And you really have to rethink the proposition of, I'm going to work with my driver, then try to work against my driver.
So is it Netradyne's view, maybe one of its founding principles, is that the way cameras were operated in the past, and maybe still are in some places, was mostly to point out things that were wrong rather than things that were right?
Yeah, so I call it, there's this epic battle, right? You can go back in history of all these great epic battles, but it's the commercial trucking industry versus the litigator, the aggressive attorney, the billboard attorney. And I've been in the industry for 25 plus years, and when I started, the killer technology was the inertial sensor that detected a hard brake. And fleets were able to use that data to defend themselves in court. And essentially the litigators had said, hey, time out. That's awesome, but we need video because we think that you might be making up the data. And that was the birth of the camera industry in sense of having a crash recorder. You get into a unfortunate incident and the video records 15, 20 seconds of time. And now you have a better picture of what happened. The plaintiff attorneys, they're not, they started losing again. And so now what they're really trying to do is go after the safety culture. How often do you talk to your driver? What type of steps do you have to coach your driver? Can you demonstrate their good driving habits? Because they'll use that against you in court. Juries are pretty biased against the truck driver. And in a lot of cases, you need to be able to demonstrate, here's my driver who's a great ambassador to the road, who had an event. And it wasn't because of the safety culture. It was, this single event. And the byproduct of that going after the safety culture is these nuclear verdicts. They find a piece of paperwork that's not done right, or a license that's done not right, or they claim you haven't talked to your driver enough. And that allows them to start to expand these lawsuits, which, to a lot of fleets are very detrimental. So, video has now come to a stage where it's really set up to work with the driver, work with the fleet to, actually lay those foundations of a great safety culture.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because just this week we published a story that I wrote about a U.S. Chamber of Commerce report on nuclear verdicts. And one of the points they made was that plaintiffs' attorneys are now doing that really, I hate to call it nitpicking, okay, but where they're looking at things that aren't necessarily steps that were taken or weren't taken that led to the accident, but instead the whole idea of culture. So I guess your argument here is that a company that's got, that not just has cameras, but uses them in certain ways can kind of fend off that argument, because it's another kind of feather in their cap that in fact their safety culture is a strong one.
Yeah. So I think about it in four ways for a fleet. And, there's not one single magic product that you can build that will make all your problems go away in court. There's messaging from the top of the executives. There's, the positive atmosphere with the drivers. There's, the actual executing of a plan. So all those things still have to happen. But the four things that I think about when a fleet talks to me about, hey, how do I better position myself not to be in the crosshairs? One is like practice, right? So actually go through mock trials and examine your safety culture to see where there might be holes. And unfortunately, that requires devoting some time, which everyone's busy, but you actually have to go down and say, okay, if I was the plaintiff attorney, where would I attack me? And the more practice you have there, the better. And there's a lot of companies that can come out and do some interesting audits and kind of give you some tidbits. The second one is storytelling. Push out your message of, I think I saw a great article by one of the fleets that is nominated constantly for best places to drive for. And they talked about all these driver services, satellite TV and restrooms and weight rooms and, showers. And at the end it said, hey, and we've made an investment in safety technology because our drivers are the most important resource we have.
Yeah, like that should have been at the top, right?
Right. But that's them telling the story versus waiting to get into court where someone tells the story about you. The third one is showing discretionary effort, right? So proof points that your drivers are trying, right? So an average driver drives 10,000 minutes every month. The storyline is better. Which storyline would you like? I had a driver who had 2 incidents of aggressive speeding, or I had proof that my driver drove with 100% compliance for 9,980 minutes that month, right? So having that positive element to say my drivers are trying hard, and we have this, we have these proof points that they're actually not, I call it bootleggers, smoking the bandit. I think I just aged myself.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one is having an infrastructure of, I call it increased connection with your driver. So embracing things like in-cab audio notifications, slow down, create space, put your seatbelt on, wake up. All these things are very nuanced, but, those are digital conversations and sharing information over a mobile app, pushing out remote training. So the old model of, hey, everyone get into the building and we're going to have a quarterly safety meeting, that's under attack. And the new ask is, have you talked to your driver once a day?
Right.
Well, you have to use technology to do that. And so the position that we've taken is that if I have to use technology to protect my fleet, I'm going to advocate for the driver and make sure they're excited to be part of that program versus, I'm going to use all that technology to defend myself in fleet, but I'm also going to alienate my driver along the way, which kind of seems like a contradiction itself.
Well, let's talk about your offering, your software offering. I won't call it software offering, your technological solution. I've always been fascinated by these whether it's, technology solution or let's say a supply chain software solution like a Blue Yonder type of thing, in which the product has to all do about 90% of the same thing. Cameras have a base functionality that they have to do. Supply chain software has a base functionality that it has to do. And really where the battle is that last 10%, 5%, I'll bet it's even less than 10%, okay, in which one company can succeed where others don't. So if you were sitting down and you had to kind of admit to a potential customer, hey, look, we do 90% of what everybody else does, but here's why we're better. And then what would you say?
Well, and there are a lot of commonalities between every system that's out there. So things like hard braking and speeding and hard acceleration and turns, those are very common. Those are table stakes. The big difference that DriverEye does versus other systems is all that analysis of the event is done actually at the device. So when I can determine that you're traveling at 2 seconds following distance, but and closing rather aggressively, I do all that computation at the device where I look at the scene, I analyze the scene, and I can start talking to the driver immediately. Right? Act now, talk later. I'm going to try to fix the problem now with the driver, and then later we're going to review the tape and go over the play-by-play later. But the goal is to use technology to eliminate these little, these small leading indicators of risk as quickly as possible. And so what DriverEye does is scans the environment outside the vehicle and at the device level does all that computation, all that analysis, and says, you're too close. My next step is I'm going to tell the driver to back off, and then I'm going to send the information to the headquarters. We want to try to solve the problem as quickly as possible.
Now, let's just clarify product names. Good. DriverEye is the name of your primary offering?
That's correct. Yeah. When we, our first product has an external lens, 2 peripheral lenses, and then a lens that looks inside the camera or inside the cabin. And so what we thought about it is really we're capturing everything that the driver eye can see, like all the peripheral outside. So we wanted to mimic what the driver could see outside, inside the vehicle to capture that scene. No surprises, no, hey, there's a car over here or a bicycle over here or a moose over there. We wanted to see what the driver could see.
And you also have something called the Green Zone Score. Do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, Green Zone Score, it's one of my favorite things because I've been in the safety tech, the safety space, safety telematics space for 25 plus years. And one of the things that we found out was that most scoring measurements were only based on what you did wrong. And back in the day when we first started Netradyne, we had a couple of these small LEDs that we imposed on video, and we all huddled up together, and we saw the first 20 minutes of video that was captured by DriverEye. And 19 out of 20 of those minutes were actually these green LEDs. And everyone was a little disappointed because we were looking for something fantastic, some some trucker, fantastic thing, jump in a gorge or, bootlegging or something. But I actually got excited because I'm like, time out a second. We just did something that no one else has done. We're actually recording the driver doing good work. And so we kind of thought about the naming convention for the measurement, and it's how much time the driver spends in the green zone, right? Those green LEDs, how much time. So we capture good driving and we give drivers credit for good driving, which is a little different than other systems where, again, these 10,000 minutes a month, I might have 5 minutes where I just lost focus. Well, in a legacy system, I'm now labeled for those 5 minutes, where what I believe and what we believe and what Netradyne built a product around is that you should be measured on the 10,000 minutes. So, the 9,995 minutes of good driving, the 5 minutes that we have to talk about, but it should be a balanced conversation.
Are you finding, let's talk about market penetration, because that kind of leads me to that next question. Are you finding that there's still a mindset out there that they want the camera system to point out things that are wrong, number one? And number two, how has camera penetration slowed during these tough rate markets? Every time I've spoken with somebody from the camera business, we'll call it, for lack of a better term, they always say that the biggest pain point is the cost. Companies, small fleets just do not want to spend the money on that, even though you can easily make an argument that it's cost effective over time. So are people accepting more of a kind of a positive message? And but does not any of this matter right now? Are people just tightening their belts so much that new sales are kind of tough?
I would say if I was to compare this time, this moment of time versus the last time we experienced a kind of a freight situation like we are now, I think some of the pressures that are adding for fleets to add or consider video are, again, the insurance element, and then the insurance companies are starting to mandate or subsidize video camera technologies. And the other piece that I think has increased from the last time we were in this kind of market phase is the increased attention that we have from plaintiff attorneys. The sudden rise in nuclear verdicts, which, very much like we all get together as an industry, we go to ATA and TCA and TMC and all these great events where we share. The plaintiff attorneys do the same thing. They have conferences that they strategize how to attack target markets. So I think that pressure is greater than it was the last time we went to a market condition like we are now. And to some degree, the technology itself has gotten down to where it could be $1 to $2 a day, to put a camera on your vehicle, which, there's plenty of return on investment, conversations wrapped around accident reduction and maybe even in some cases that increase of driver engagement, which changes the conversation in court. So there are always going to be elements that put pressure on buying certain technologies. I think that there's a stronger push now, until things like tort reform come, spread across all the United States. I think Florida has done a nice job of doing some tort reform in terms of plaintiff attorneys, and hopefully that spreads. The ATA has a huge advocacy of tort reform. So until that really gets laid out, I think there's this continued pressure to know what's happening in your fleet.
Let's talk about AI and how you're using it. Of course, everybody thinks that AI was invented 3 weeks ago. As we know, it was not. ChatGPT certainly brought it to the forefront. What are you doing in terms of using AI? And I understand that a lot of it is where in the past, the recommendation, not the recommendation, but the advice given by the trucking company had to come from a human being. But now there's more application of AI in which the software itself can tell the driver what it did right or what it did wrong.
Yeah. So there's, I'll give you an example of both an alert and then a positive event. So I think the term AI over time has replaced the wording of big data, right? Big data used to be the buzzword, and now AI is the buzzword. But there's certain things within AI that are very interesting. One is machine learning, where you teach a machine to do a process. And a lot of I call it the legacy crash recorders, did a really good job of saying, when I see an inertial event, like a hard brake, I'm going to turn on the camera and I'm going to record, right? So that's a machine learning process that you train a machine to do an activity based on like an if-then statement. Where that's evolved and where Netradyne and Driver Eye start using some of those same components is that we've trained on objects. So we have an object-based learning model that, as an example, I've studied and looked at stop signs. And as I'm driving down the road and I recognize, is that a stop sign? Is it a stop sign for my vehicle? What action did my vehicle do at that stop sign, right? So did I run through the stop sign with a no stop? That's pretty severe. Did I do a California stop, where I rolled through it? The interesting piece that Driver Eye differentiates a little bit is we actually record the full stop. So the conversation's not only how many times you went through the stop sign, but I can also talk about stop sign compliance, right? So if you and I both had 3 stop sign alerts, and at the end of the day, they had to decide who to talk to. Well, if you went to 1,000 intersections, I went to 100 intersections, all of a sudden your 3 have a different context than my 3. So, that's one application where we look at objects on the road and quickly determine how they impact the driving performance of the driver. Another interesting piece that we've started to pick up, and it's a feature we've called driver stars. So a driver star is where a vehicle is traveling down the road on the right-hand side of the lane, traveling 55 miles an hour in a 55 mile per hour zone, doing everything that the fleet has asked them to do. And now you have a car that comes out and cuts them off and jeopardizes that following distance. The action that you want from the driver is to create space. So in a lot of cases, we actually track where drivers have an immediate risk around their vehicle and they've self-corrected based on their training. And we use that as I call it a rewarding alert or a rewarding event versus only telling them what they did wrong. So, when you sit down with drivers and they're like, what new technology you're rolling out? A lot of the times what I'll start with is I'll show them a driver star and say, if you can define other driver stars, we'll build it because we want to capture these good moments on the road because we historically we haven't believed you and now we want to believe you.
Which is good to hear. Let's point out, I guess, that all of your programming is done internally, right? You're not buying AI off the shelf from somebody else.
There's a lot of smarty pants here. We have operations here in we have a global operations on our team. So as a developer, it's always nice to have an idea. I get to go to sleep. I wake up and it's done. So we have talented resources that are spread across the globe. A lot of, I call it data scientists, PhDs that have all the fancy math with the summation signs, and it looks like Russell Crowe, beautiful mind. But it's a lot of people who are really working hard to make sure that we shine the right light on drivers.
Well, Adam, we want to thank you for coming in today on Drilling Deep, not only as a guest but as a sponsor. We've been talking to Adam Khan of Netradyne. For short term, I'm going to call it a camera company. Okay, it's more than that. He's the Chief Development Officer there. Adam, thanks for coming in.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thumbs up and stay safe, everyone.
Okay, you have been watching Drilling Deep. We are part of the FreightCast family of podcasts from FreightWaves. You can find us on YouTube, the FreightWaves YouTube channel. There's a specific channel just dedicated to Drilling Deep. You can also find us on all the leading podcast platforms. Thanks, and please join us again. We want to thank our sponsor this month, Netradyne. Ready to step up your fleet safety? Titan Freight reduced distracted driving by 96% while losing 0 drivers after implementing Netradyne Driver Eye, the leading AI fleet camera system. Go to Netradyne.com to learn more about how Driver Eye can revolutionize your fleet safety too.